Okay, so we're just continuing our um my sort of series of blogs around the inspiration behind pieces and just some of the little things that I did to put the pieces together. And this one today is the one I called Heavy, and it's actually the start of the entire symphony. So it's the beginning of movement one. It's the first themes that are introduced, and initially I wanted to go for something that was quite grand. It's not particularly a lot of layers, as you can see. There's only two guitars, one bass track, and drums. But I tried to sort of take inspiration from bands such as Dream Theater with this one, and they wrote an album in 2015 that was sort of a musical narrative to a big grand story concept, and they opened with an overture, but they had guitar parts like this throughout the entire album. So something that's where the bass and the guitar sort of sync up together, and the drums provide the space. So I'll just play the first little section here for you. So you can hear it's played at 126 BPM. It is in 4/4 at this point, and it's played in D minor, the key of D minor. The guitar is tuned down to drop D for this, just to give that sort of rumbling low end and make it sound a bit more powerful and forceful. But as you can see, we've got the guitar here, which is playing that part. And then we've also got the bass playing exactly the same thing. And then the drums is a little bit different. It's very simple. It's a lot of hi-hat work, just very simple hi-hat work with some small fills between the kick and snare. And it's synced up to that guitar part to make sure that it all links together nicely. So we then move on to bar 17, where it's a similar sort of idea. It's still all based around the same idea, but we change the riff a little bit, change the idea very slightly, start to vary it, and it's the first introduction of the idea of statement, development, restatement, conclusion in the riffs. And we'll just give you a little bit of how that bit sounded. So it's still very simple, and then you get this small fill here at the end on the guitar. So I'll very quickly just isolate that guitar track so you can hear that. So that little fill at the end of the section, I was trying to take some influence from the way that Claudio Sanchez, the guitarist of Coheed and Cambria, plays some of his riffs, and he uses fills like this quite regularly. and it's an idea of using open strings and the fretted notes of the same notes. So basically, that little fill that starts around here starts here. It starts on the open A string, moves to the 3rd fret, which is a C, and then the 5th fret, which is D, and then it plays the open D string straight after, hammers onto the 2nd fret, which is an E, back to the open D, and then the C and D on the A string again. So you're making use of the slightly different tones of the open D note and the fretted D note on the A string. And it's a really subtle difference, but it does sort of add some life to that little fill. And I was very pleased with sort of coming up with that little fill. And then the bass again is copying that pretty much identically. I think it is identical. Okay, so the bass instead is rumbling on the low D for the majority, and then just taking in the small fills at the end, and then there's a different fill. So that just adds a little bit of a difference, and it's more of a driving sound. So if you put the two together, it sits underneath the guitar nicely and just sort of rumbles along while the guitar makes more movement. You've just got that low rumbling where the guitar moves a little bit more, and just the constant playing of the D note on the bass. And then when the bass does sync up with the guitar, it adds a nice effect. So then, after that, we get into this section on bar 25, which is where it starts to get a little bit more technical. So for this, I wanted to start playing with feel a bit more, of the feel of the groove. So I'm going to show you it from the drumming perspective first. Sorry, it's when we get to bar 33 that it changes. So we'll look at the drums first. So this is in the previous section. And again, the drums are very simple, still synced up with the guitar mostly. And then here we completely change up the sound. We go for something a little bit more staggered. The hi-hat is still constantly playing on the each beat of the bar. But then you've got that staggered kick, and the snare coming in as well on odd beats. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you've got the snare hitting on 3 every time. And the reason for that is this guitar line, which, like I said, I wanted to get a little bit more progressive in terms of sort of what modern progressive bands would do, which is really sort of bend the ideas of what phrasing and rhythmic ideas you can put into any given time signature. You'll also notice that when we hit bar 33, the tempo moves up to 140 BPM rather than 126, and that was just to give it a little bit more zip, and to really give it some life and movement. So we'll play this guitar part with the drums, and then I'll talk to you about it a little bit more. So as you can tell, it's moving down a phrase chromatically. It's the same shape every time, just moving down chromatically. And we also move from playing in the key of D minor to playing in F on this part. So basically, the way I played the part was every time you hit the low A string, you hit the low A string, and then hammer on to, so it starts off hammering on to the E, then the E note on the A string, and then to the F, and then we shift on to the D string, and we play the 7th fret, which would be an A, or a B, sorry, and then move down to the B flat. And there's a lot of slides involved, just semitonal slides, to create that really progressive feel. And then we get to bar 38, and this is the first time in the piece that we bring in a different time signature, and we just bring in a bar of 5/4. So something that I discussed with my supervisor throughout recording these pieces and writing these pieces was trying to find little moments where you could just, you know, throw in a time signature with an extra beat to what you've already established, just to give this turnaround. And before the listener realizes that it's different, it goes back to normal, but they can feel that something's changed. So you can sort of feel that with this. So I'll just count it out. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. You know, you don't realise that it's added that extra beat in, but you realise that something's changed. You can't quite put your finger on why. And then as we get to bar 39 and the cycle repeats itself, and this is the last section of this track, because we move on to the next track, which I'll talk about in the next video. We bring in this second guitar track, and basically I'll show you what it's layered up with. So in terms of amp, it's a sort of tweed combo, and it's quite an American sounding amp. And in terms of the pedals, we've got a little drive pedal, we've got a flange pedal which isn't actually engaged, and we've got the sort of Digitech whammy modded pedal. So if I take away the gain from it and just solo that track, and you can hear it with the octave. So you can hear that it sounds quite drony, almost like a sitar when it's played without the drive. But then we add the drive back in, and it's got that sitar-y sound still, but it's a bit more forceful. And I'll just show you how those two guitars actually sync up. So I wanted the second guitar to just add a different flavour, and it's based around D in this one. So it plays D, then C sharp, then C, then back to C sharp. It's basically your root notes for each sort of section of the main guitar's rhythm. So we'll put them together. And what I wanted there was just these two harmonies that do work, but they add a little bit of a different colour to the piece. It turns it from being something that's just sort of aggressive and powerful sounding to actually taking on a bit of a sinister turn. And it was something that I was experimenting with in a number of pieces across the symphony. And this just felt like a perfect opportunity to do that. So what I'll do now is I'll pop everything back in and we'll play it from bar 33. So that's the end of the piece there from bar 33 to the end there. And obviously you can hear the bass there, it's actually mirroring what this second guitar does, but moving between the octaves and the fifth. And I wanted to do that to just try and give a little bit of reinforcement to that second line. And also to suggest something a bit more in terms of chord, rather than it just literally being like this. Sorry, because if we'd left it like this with just the guitar and the drums, I think it would have felt really bare. But having that little bit of a development helps it a lot. And then put the bass back in. And it just adds more of an idea of harmony. So then when that second guitar does come in, you feel it more, and it doesn't feel as jarring because you've already sort of subtly reinforced that chord idea. And you'll also realise that from the first half of the riff until the second guitar comes in, when that second guitar comes in, the bass rhythm actually changes. So if we just solo the bass and the drums. You know, you hear that subtle change in rhythm. So that is the end of the initial first piece. We then move into the second main theme of the first movement. This bit here was my initial attempt to get this piece to work at the end of movement one. So when the initial two themes sync back up together in the recapitulation phase. And basically, my first attempt of it was to put this piece together with the other piece, which is also, which obviously transposes from its original key to D minor to sync back up with this, and my initial attempt was to just put them both together at the same tempo and let them play out. It didn't work at all. The changes in groove, and especially the section, this section at the end where we move to the 5/4 bar, it didn't work over the other piece. So I had to find a different way of doing that. So what I'm going to do in the next video is talk about the second themes, sort of the second part of the first movement, and then after that I will show you the final section of that first movement in the video following that, so that you can sort of piece everything together individually. So this is, I'll just play you a little snippet of it. It's literally exactly the same, apart from that it's at 140 BPM throughout rather than 126 at the start. So it's exactly the same, you can tell that. So yeah, what I'm going to do in the next video is talk about the second section of the first movement, where we introduce the second main theme, which is also something that you'll hear multiple times throughout the rest of the composition. And then we'll talk about the recapitulation phase after that. So cheers.